There are currently two deals for sale in Cleveland, Ohio, both being marketed towards investors. And I wanted to have a quick chat with Chatto and help you learn how to analyze these deals in under 10 minutes. The five big things I look at and how I put those things into my thought process to determine whether or not I want to even pursue looking at these two deals. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. There's actually two properties currently on the market for sale in Cleveland, Ohio. The first one is on Canton Avenue. It is listed for $95,000 and it actually is a 2-unit property. So great, 2 units, double the income, right? So that might be the better deal. The second property is a single family house on Holborn Avenue listed for $135,000. So let's kind of run through the numbers and do a quick analysis to see if it's worth even pursuing. So first, let's look at the duplex. So I ran the numbers on this duplex. So the first thing I look at is how much is the property rented for. This property has long-term tenants. They've been there a long time. They were actually in the listing. It says that they were there before the current owner purchased the property. And the one unit is rented for $545 and the other unit is rented for $688. So the total rent that this property is bringing in is only $1,233 per month. So there's probably some upward potential there, but that's what it's rented for. And I don't know what the rent increase rules are in Canton, Ohio, but just as the property sits, the way it is right now, it's bringing in $1,233 a month. So let's run some numbers. So if the property is bringing in $1,233 a month, I did my numbers. That's $14,796 per year in income. Cool. So that's our income. Now we need to get some expenses going. So the second thing I look at is taxes and insurance. The taxes on that property are $1,521 per year. Now insurance, we don't have an exact price until we get a quote, but at least in my market, I've noticed that insurance on a duplex is usually somewhere around $1,200-$1,300. So we'll put in $1,250 in this account. So the rent is $14,796. Taxes and insurance are another $1,250 and $1,521. So we have taxes and insurance, we subtract those out. Now it is a multi-family house. So chances are we have to pay for water and sewer because it's not separated, not on separate meters. So if we're paying for water and sewer, I'm guessing it's probably going to be somewhere around $100 a month. So could be more, could be less, but that's a good, you got to plug some sort of number in. So $1,200 a month, I'm sorry, not a month, a year. $1,200 a year for water and sewer and another $1,200 a month for lawn care and snow removal because this is a multifamily. Single families, the tenants handle all that stuff. So I did the numbers. I did the $14,796 rent minus the $1,250 minus the $1,521 minus the $1,200 minus the $1,200, and I got a final net operating income on this property if we purchased it free and clear of $9,625 per year. Now, the third thing I look at is the all-in cash flow, and what I mean by that. So if I bought this property for $95,000, it is a performing rental. So I probably need to put $5,000 into closing costs and whatnot, and another $5,000 at least maybe for a few small repairs that need to get done. So I'm going to need $105,000 to purchase and have a little bit of reserves on this property. So if I'm in for $105,000, and what I do is I take that number and I multiply it by 10%, which would be $10,500. That would be interest only 10%, which I know that's like may not be exactly what you're getting, but it gets my head in the right ballpark. So I'm going to be spending $10,500 per year. Like I said, this property is probably going to bring me in $9,625. I'm losing almost $1,000 a year, $875 a year. I'd be losing if I purchased this property with 100% financing and a 10% interest only loan. So this is probably not going to cash flow. Ugh. You think that the duplex that's cheaper is probably going to be the better deal. And believe it or not, that's what the AI thought until I looked at it. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. So that's the first property. The second property I want to look at is on Holborn Avenue, also in Cleveland. And that is a completely renovated property listed at $135,000. So I'm like, okay, Interesting. So I did a little market research and said, okay, what would this property rent for? Let's run the same numbers that we did on the other property. So this property is going to rent for probably potentially $1,600, but I'm a little more conservative. So I said this property is going to rent for $1,500. So $1,500 a month times 12 months is going to bring in $18,000 a year. Cool. Well, insurance. It's a single family house. It's going to be cheaper than a duplex. Probably about $1,000 a year for property insurance. So I subtract out the $1,000. I'm going to need to pay for taxes. Taxes on this property were $1,405. So now I have my income minus my insurance minus my taxes. I don't have to worry about water because the tenants pay the water because it's a single family house. I don't have to worry about lawn care because it's a single family house. I don't have to worry about snow removal because it's a single family house. So really, I'm looking at 18,000 minus the 1,000 minus the 1,405, and I have a net operating income of 15,595. That's a little better than the other property. How much is it going to cost me? Well, this property, like I said, is completely renovated. The guy bought it really cheap not too long ago. Completely renovated the property, new appliances, new everything. It's not going to need anything for a while. It's like a set it and forget it turnkey rental. So I'm like, okay. So if I bought that for $135 and I had $5,000 in closing costs, I say, okay, my all-in is $140. If I borrow $140,000 at 10% interest only, it's going to cost me $14,000 per year to pay the interest. Well, my net operating income is $15,595. So this property actually is cash flowing at a little bit, right? Again, it's not much, but it's actually in the positive $1,595, so almost $1,600 per year. That's a little bit more promising than the duplex. Now, the other piece of it is, like I said, okay, it's going to be $1,500 a month. The rent could be more, right? Which is a good thing. And I don't really have any expenditures that I'm going to need to make anytime soon. So this one maybe has potential. So that one's a little better than the 2-unit. Interesting. So the next thing I'm going to look at is the area. I don't know Cleveland, Ohio very well. I drove by both properties on Street View. They both look very similar. So, I mean, I'd obviously do my due diligence, but, you know, I'm looking more now at the analyzation of the numbers. So the fifth thing that we look at is I want to have 25% equity. So does this property give me a position where I have 25% equity? I looked at both. I looked at what stuff's selling for. There is not too much on the market that's sold for much more than the 135. There's a couple that were up there. There was one that was like 150 something. So I'm like, okay, if the property is 150, right, I'm going to need to be all in. If it's actually worth 150, if it'll appraise for 150, I would have to be in for 112,500, right? That would be my all-in price. Again, I'm buying the property's already renovated, so maybe there's a little of a premium due. And I also need to cash flow more than $1,600 a year, right? I want to make at least $300 a month on this property. So 300 times 12 is 3,600. You know, where I would need to back out the numbers and see what my offer would be to get at that $300 a month cash flow at the 10% interest only variable that I put in there. So both of these are close, but I would probably ignore the $95,000 duplex and I would look at the $135,000 single family first. And again, it doesn't mean you can't put in offers on both, but it was surprising that the more expensive single family property was actually cash flowing more than the less expensive duplex. The other thing that caught my mind, the one property is completely renovated, is low capex. The duplex, right, we need to think about things critically. The duplex has had the same tenants forever. So that is not necessarily a good thing. They've probably been there a while. They've probably, looking from the outside of the property on Google Street View, they haven't been taking great care of it. And they're way below market rent. And if you raise the rents to where they need to be, or where they could be, you might lose a tenant. Could happen, right? So when either one of these tenants move out, you probably have a hefty turnover, right? So I did the numbers based on 105, just having like 5,000 in reserve for something that goes wrong. But a turnover on this property would probably be 20 grand per unit when these people move out. Your rents are going to be a lot higher at the end, but you're going to need to have more substantial reserves on the 2 unit. So that being said, it's important to kind of take that into consideration. If, right, you might be willing to say to yourself, you know what, I might like the $95,000 property better, right? I get that I'm very little cash flow on this, but when these tenants move out, I'll be able to put some money into it and really create that cash flow. And long term, it might be worth more than the single family, right? And it's a preference thing. But the point of it is, we need to look at the numbers and see where we are and make sure that we put on both of these properties an offer that would make sense based on the numbers we have, right? So on the single family house, and I'm just doing these numbers right now that I'm thinking of it, right? So I want a cash flow $300 a month. That's $3,600 a year. So in order to cash flow at $3,600 a year, I need to get my my net operating income on the single family house was 15,595, and I'm going to subtract out the 3,600, which leaves me 11,995 for debt service at 10%. So I divide that by 0.1, and I can pay up to, my all-in price would be 119,950. So I would probably be offering 115,000 on the single family house. Now, on the other side of this, on the property that cash flows 9625 per year, I would subtract out my 3,600, and that would get me 6,025. Divide that by 0.1 because I'm paying 10% interest, and my all-in price on that is going to be closer to 60,000. But there's some potential to raise rent and do some turnovers and really increase the value. So in my mind, I might be able to pay more than that. That being said, though, the single family house is much closer. I'm more likely to get an offer of 115 accepted on a $135,000 house than I am to get 60,000 accepted on a $95,000 house. But that's kind of how I think through the process. Hopefully my thinking through this online with you here in this video helps. Hopefully this video is of value to you. And actually I have a property walkthrough sheet that I put together, which you're more than welcome to have. You just click the link below and you can go to my website and you can download it. And it shows you when you're walking through a property, what you should look for when it's your rental, right? So that you can prevent maintenance issues, so that you can prevent service calls, and then you can that you can just make sure that you get everything handled while you're there in one shot. So hopefully this video is of value to you. We're about 13-14 minutes in now in this episode of Chat with Chatto, and I appreciate your hanging out with me today. And as always, we'll see you on the next episode of Chat with Chatto.